There are moments in life when we find ourselves in conversations that make us uneasy. Maybe it's a difficult discussion with a colleague, a disagreement with a friend, or a tough conversation with a loved one. In these moments, our instinct is often to defend, to protect, to retreat. We build walls, we prepare counter-arguments before the other person has even finished speaking, and we focus on winning rather than understanding. But what if I told you there's a better way? What if I told you that the key to navigating these uncomfortable conversations is not in what we say, but in how we listen, how we approach, and how we respond? Imagine this: you're sitting across from someone and the tension is thick. Your heart is racing, your palms are sweaty, and you can feel the conflict building. Maybe it's a confrontation you've been avoiding for days, or maybe it's an unexpected disagreement that caught you off guard. In that moment, you have a choice. You can react instinctively, fueled by emotion and the desire to be right. Or you can pause, take a breath, and choose a different path. The next time you find yourself in an uncomfortable conversation, try this: approach it with curiosity instead of defensiveness. Instead of listening to respond, listen to understand. Instead of proving a point, seek to learn something new. Most of us go into difficult conversations armed with our own perspective, ready to argue our side. But the truth is, perspective is not the full picture, it's just one piece of the puzzle. Every person carries their own experiences, fears, and biases into a conversation. And if we only focus on defending our viewpoint, we miss the opportunity to see things through another lens. Think about the last time you had a difficult conversation. Maybe it was with a coworker who disagreed with your approach. Maybe it was with a friend who let you down. Maybe it was with a family member whose values clashed with yours. In that moment, were you truly listening? Or were you simply waiting for your turn to speak? When we shift our focus from being heard to truly hearing the other person, something remarkable happens. The tension eases, the walls come down, the conversation transforms from a battle into a bridge. Now, I know what you're thinking, but what if they're wrong? What if I need to stand my ground? And that's a fair question. Listening to understand doesn't mean you have to agree. It doesn't mean you have to compromise your values or back down from your beliefs. It simply means you're creating space for connection, for dialogue, for growth. The best communicators, the best leaders, the best problem solvers, they don't shy away from difficult conversations. They lean into them. They approach them with humility, with patience, and with the courage to be wrong. Because the goal of a conversation isn't to win. The goal is to grow. There's a simple technique that can change the way you approach uncomfortable conversations. The next time you feel the urge to argue, pause and ask yourself, what if I'm missing something? Those 5 words hold immense power. They shift your mindset from one of certainty to one of openness. And when you're open, you create room for new insights, for empathy, for deeper connection. Consider a time when you had a misunderstanding with someone. Maybe it was a small miscommunication that escalated into a bigger issue. At the heart of most conflicts is not a lack of agreement, but a lack of understanding. We assume we know someone's intentions. We assume we know their reasoning, but assumptions are dangerous because they close the door to real conversation. Instead of assuming, try asking. Instead of jumping to conclusions, try clarifying. A simple "help me understand why you feel this way" can shift the entire energy of a conversation. It signals to the other person that you value their perspective, even if you don't agree with it. And when people feel heard, they're more likely to listen in return. Uncomfortable conversations are an inevitable part of life, but they don't have to be something we fear. They can be opportunities to build trust, to strengthen relationships, to challenge our own thinking. The next time you find yourself in a conversation that feels uncomfortable, remember this: you don't have to have all the answers. You don't have to prove anything. You just have to be present. You just have to be open. You just have to listen. Because in the end, the quality of our conversations determines the quality of our relationships. And the quality of our relationships determines the quality of our lives. So let's choose to have better conversations. Let's choose to listen with intention, to speak with kindness, and to approach discomfort not as something to avoid, but as something to embrace. Because on the other side of an uncomfortable conversation is growth. On the other side of an uncomfortable conversation is connection. And on the other side of an uncomfortable conversation is a better, stronger, more understanding version of yourself. Most people listen with the intent to reply, not to understand. The moment another person starts speaking, our minds begin formulating a response. We latch onto a single point, preparing our counter-argument, waiting for a pause so we can jump in. But when we do this, we aren't truly listening, we're simply waiting for our turn to speak. This approach creates disconnection. It turns conversations into competitions where the goal is to prove a point rather than build a bridge. When we listen to understand, we shift from hearing words to absorbing meaning. We stop filtering the conversation through our own biases and begin to see it from the other person's perspective. It's a mindset shift that requires patience and presence. Instead of thinking about how to respond, we focus entirely on what is being said. We pay attention not just to the words, but to the emotions behind them. We notice tone, pauses, and what remains unsaid. This kind of listening creates space for clarity and trust. In moments of disagreement, listening to understand can feel counterintuitive. Our instincts tell us to defend, to correct, to push back. But true understanding doesn't come from talking, it comes from receiving. When someone feels truly heard, their defense is lower. They feel respected. And when people feel respected, they become more open to listening in return. This is how difficult conversations become productive. Practicing this kind of listening requires discipline. It means resisting the urge to interrupt. It means asking thoughtful questions instead of making assumptions. It means acknowledging the other person's experience, even if we don't agree with it. The result is deeper conversations, stronger relationships, and a greater ability to navigate conflict, wisdom, and empathy. Assumptions are one of the quickest ways to create misunderstandings. When we assume, we fill in gaps with our own interpretations rather than seeking the truth. We assume we know what someone meant, what they were thinking, or why they acted a certain way. These assumptions often come from our own experiences, biases, and insecurities, not from reality. And once an assumption takes root, it shapes our reactions, our emotions, and the way we engage in conversation. Clarification is a far more powerful tool. Instead of making conclusions based on limited information, we can ask direct questions. What did you mean by that? Can you help me understand? Are you saying this because? These simple inquiries prevent unnecessary tension and create room for honest discussion. They allow us to engage with the actual message rather than reacting to what we think the message was. Miscommunication happens when two people operate on different understandings of the same situation. One person might assume a comment was made with bad intent, while the other had no such intention. One might believe they are being ignored, while the other is simply distracted. The gap between perception and reality widens when we fail to clarify. And the longer we go without addressing it, the bigger the misunderstanding becomes. Seeking clarification also demonstrates respect. It shows that we value accuracy over assumption, that we care about the other person's true thoughts rather than just our perception of them. It eliminates unnecessary conflict and builds trust. Instead of acting on emotions triggered by an assumption, we take a step back and verify. This approach turns difficult conversations into opportunities for deeper understanding and mutual respect. People want to feel heard. It's a fundamental human need. When someone speaks and feels like their words matter, they become more open, more engaged, and more willing to listen in return. But when they feel dismissed, ignored, or misunderstood, walls go up. They become defensive. They resist listening because they don't feel like they're being listened to. Most conversations break down because both sides are too focused on being understood rather than understanding. They are waiting for their turn to speak, ready to push their own perspective forward, without taking a moment to genuinely acknowledge the other person's point of view. This creates a cycle where neither person feels valued, leading to frustration, resentment, and disengagement. The only way to break this cycle is to give what we wish to receive: attentive, respectful listening. When someone feels truly heard, it changes the dynamic of a conversation. It makes them feel respected, validated, and safe. They no longer need to fight for attention or push harder to make their point. They naturally become more receptive to the other person's words. This is why the best communicators, whether in leadership, relationships, or difficult discussions, prioritize listening before speaking. They ask thoughtful questions, reflect on what's being said, and acknowledge emotions. They create space for the other person's voice, knowing that this is the key to being heard in return. Listening doesn't mean silence. It's not just about waiting for the other person to finish talking. It's about showing engagement, nodding, making eye contact, responding with understanding. It's about repeating back key points to show comprehension. So what you're saying is, or I hear that you feel frustrated. Because these small signals make a person feel valued, which makes them far more likely to return the favor. Even in disagreements, this principle applies. If someone feels that their perspective has been dismissed, they will hold on to it even more tightly. But if they feel that their view has been acknowledged, they will be more open to hearing an alternative. This is the foundation of constructive conversations. When we set aside the urge to immediately prove our own point, and instead focus on making the other person feel heard, we create an environment where both sides can listen, reflect, and ultimately find common ground. Too often, conversations feel like competitions. We approach them as if there's a winner and a loser, as if the goal is to prove our point, out-argue the other person, or walk away feeling victorious. But when we treat conversations like battles, we lose sight of their true purpose. Conversations are not about proving who is right, they are about creating understanding. The need to win comes from ego. It comes from the desire to be validated, to assert control, to avoid feeling vulnerable. But in trying to win, we often push people away. We shut down dialogue. We make the other person defensive rather than open. When someone feels like they're being debated rather than understood, they stop listening. They stop engaging in a meaningful way because they no longer feel safe to express themselves. Understanding, on the other hand, creates connection. It shifts the focus from how can I win to what can I learn. It allows us to see the other person's perspective, even if we don't agree with it. It makes space for nuance, for empathy, for deeper conversations that actually lead to progress. When the goal is understanding, conversations become more productive. Instead of reacting emotionally, we listen with curiosity. Instead of trying to dominate, we seek clarity. Instead of dismissing the other person's viewpoint, we try to see where they are coming from. This doesn't mean we always have to agree, but it does mean we approach the discussion with the intent to build bridges rather than walls. When we prioritize understanding over winning, we open the door to real growth, real solutions, and real human connection. Hit like, subscribe, and keep the motivation going.